coming to you from our studio.
Is that what we're calling this? Our study room?
Our studio.
Our fishbowl?
I like fishbowl. My favorite part is the student walking in the backgrounds that you can see in the videos.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good background.
Yeah.
It's much better than green screen.
It is much better than green screen. Although I did love my green screen when I had it.
We just were talking about your ESPN era, and we're so glad that you're out of it. So glad.
Yes.
So glad. But
Yes.
today, we're talking all things tenure on Not That Kind of a Doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so I have to introduce myself, don't I?
You
This is
do.
where this goes. Not enough coffee this morning. I'm Nick Huseby. I'm an associate professor here at University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
And I'm Guy Trainin, a professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And we are talking about tenure,
We're talking about
something
tenure.
we've gone through.
We have, and we're going to explore tenure in a couple of different ways this season. But in this episode, we're really going to be thinking about, for those of you who have managed to land a tenure track job and you're, there, congratulations, first off, mazel. It's
Yes.
great. But also, what do you do now? How does that function? What kinds of questions do you need to be asking? What ways do you need to organize your time? That's the kind of stuff that we're going to cover in this episode today, because we want you to be efficient and strategic in your march towards tenure and the work that you do as you get there. So let's talk about tenure writ large, because that might be something that's a little unclear to folks. What is tenure? Like, it's often, you want a tenure track job, but what does that actually mean?
So what it means is that within a certain period of time, you've got the probationary period. Sometimes it's very clearly defined in how many years you're expected to get there. Even then, there are ways to make it a little bit shorter, or if you need extra time and you have a reason for it, a little bit longer. The pandemic was one of those opportunities where everybody went on pause, so some people could ask for an extension in many institutions, not all. So you always have to look at the institutions you're ending up in. But you have a probationary period. The most common, I think, is 6 to 7 years. By the way, 7 years does not mean that you have full 7 years. It actually means you have 6, and in the 7th, your case is discussed. So that's important to know as you're thinking about this. And at the end of that, you get a permanent position that is protected by a variety of rules and precedents in law that about what's allowable and what's not allowable, and under what conditions can you let go or not let go. So you get a lot of protection, so you can speak freely, you can pursue your research career freely. It doesn't mean that you don't get reviewed and get feedback, and potentially if you're not performing, there could be consequences, but the road to those consequences is considerably harder, and you can't just be let go one morning. You wake up in May and somebody says you're not coming back next fall.
Well, and so as we're talking about like this notion of permanence, right, as someone who spent some time in the University of Wisconsin system, it's not necessarily permanent, right?
Yeah.
But there is a process that is designed once you have tenure, if something happens that they have to move through in order to relieve you of your job, right?
Yes.
So tenure is not necessarily a permanent, as we think of it, position, but it does give you particular rights if something happens and they want to eliminate your position, right? And so this gives you some sense of job security, but it's not particularly, as we're seeing now,
Yes.
at large across higher ed, it's not necessarily a permanent, quote unquote,
And-
position.
And I can hear you already saying So this is to the audience, by the way,
Uh-huh.
not you. But I can hear that voice that says in some places they are canceling tenure, which is happening. We're not going to talk about this today, but we are going to bring it up in one of our shows down the line as we discuss about the versions, what's happening. We have seen very little of that in reality because that transition is very complicated from a legal perspective, from a contract perspective. But we do expect more of that to happen as things develop over the next few years. And so we will talk a little bit about this, maybe bring an expert who has some ideas about how that might play out to really think about this. But I want to take that and put that aside so we can talk about the basics of tenure first.
Yeah, and I think the big takeaway from this is understand what tenure means at that institution that you are at. What are the rights that it gives you in your position? They're not necessarily the same everywhere, right? What you're granted at one institution under tenure can be different than another institution. And so you want to be aware of that. You also want to be kind of aware of, so you've landed this tenure track job and there are some processes, right, that happen. Think about this, and we'll talk a little bit more about timescale in a second, but you are really thinking about this. I was always told, think about it in terms of 5 years. You really have 5 years in order to get stuff done. Because during that 5th year, towards the tail end of that 5th year, depending on where you are, that's when you're going to start pulling all your materials together and solidifying them. And you're going to be thinking about external reviewers, because you have to find people from outside of your institution in order to look over your materials, compare that to the criteria for tenure at your institution, and weigh in their professional opinion. At that same time, your materials are going to go up within your department, and your department will vote on them. Your school will vote on them, or your college will vote on them, and then it goes up to the university and ultimately to whoever's heading your institution. And at that point, tenure is granted or earned or not, right? And all the way along those steps, you have opportunities to respond to feedback. You should be getting feedback at every single one of those rounds. The only round you don't really see are those external letters.
Although you can ask to see them.
You can ask to see them.
It is your right, but you have to do it in advance. And it has certain repercussions. That's something that we can talk about, but that's a decision you have to make. Most people that I've seen go through do not ask to see them. I've seen a few people that did ask, and we didn't see many negative consequences. The main negative consequence is somebody may refuse to write a letter if it's visible. That's your major concern.
Right. And we'll talk about the role of networking in that. I know that's one of your favorite things. So that's kind of the width of tenure as a process, and how you want to be thinking about that in terms of time scale. Just as the rights that you get through tenure are different from institution to institution, kind of the criteria for how tenure is granted or earned are also different. So you want to be aware of what are the criteria for tenure in the last few years, who has gone up for tenure, what do their records look like based upon like what the criteria are, and how can you leverage that data in order to begin crafting your narrative.
And what I want everybody to think about, as Nick said that, because I think there were a few things that were really important there that I want to highlight. And one is that there's a huge gulf between the lore of tenure and the actual facts and the knowledge on the ground. So you want to stick to what has happened in the last few years. A story from 22 years ago or 25 or 30 years ago about how somebody had a problem may very well be true and even traumatic to the people who went through it. It doesn't mean you're going to face something anywhere near that, because tenure demands tend to be revised on a fairly regular basis, about once between 5 to 10 years. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but you definitely can't project backwards. And so when you get that information, be very, very careful to stay away from the lore. And when I say lore, I mean, again, things that are older, stories that you're not sure are based in reality, like alligators in the New York subways and all of that. There are stories going around that have really no connection to reality, but people revel in telling them because they get a lot of emotion going. And also, you want to separate what's happening in other institutions from what's happening in yours, because the rules might be very, very different. And so the judgment has to be, you always have to stick with the documents you have and the processes that are in place. They're your best bet.
Yes, and to pull on that thread of tenure can feel a bit like you are Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. May the odds be ever in your favor, right? Like, it is a high stakes.
Yes, it is very high stakes.
It feels emotionally very high stakes. However, it's important to remember that you were hired for this particular job. There is a level of investment at your department and your college level in keeping you in that space, because you will have hopefully had 5 years of really developing a knowledge about your student base. Your research will go well, your service will be adequate, and trying to think about, if you don't earn tenure, then typically there's a 1-year contract extension.
Yeah.
And then after that, there's another, there sometimes isn't a search, but there sometimes is a search, right?
Yeah.
So like, there is a lot of investment there. And so keep that in mind, that tenure is not, the tenure process is not meant to be a gotcha moment.
No,
and
not at all.
There should be some support as you're going through that.
Support and regularly provided feedback, whether it's at least once, usually halfway through tenure, a 3-year evaluation. Some institutions like ours also have an annual review that gives you feedback. That feedback gives you a pointer where you are at, what do you need to work on, and something to respond to. So again, these processes, the more they are defined in the place you are, the better you are, because you can always show how you've been responsive to the course direction that you were given, if you were given, right? It could be fantastic, but there's always something to work on.
Right, there's always something to kind of work around and think about. And sometimes I'm gonna be real honest, like once a year feedback isn't enough, right? So once a year feedback is not enough. The 3rd year review, I wish there were more of it, but that brings us to this idea of, structuring your first 5 years as a tenure track professor around time and activity that are promotable, right? When you're thinking about promotion, I'm thinking about that move into tenure and setting up some of your own goals for feedback loops that, oh, I met this goal or I didn't, is I find to be a really effective way to, in absence of more frequent structural feedback, to help yourself do that.
And we did do a show about mentorship, so please take a look at that one.
In the cards somewhere.
And if your institution has formal mentoring, lean on that for a much more regular feedback. You can actually come with those goals you set for yourselves and sit with your mentor and say, here are the goals I set. Is this reasonable? Is this going to lead to a productive tenure process? And get that feedback, but also that's an accountability partner that you can work with that will give you some feedback and give you some suggestions about what you might want to think about, what are good ideas or bad ideas. And I love the fact that you talked about this in really thinking about what is promotable activity, right?
Yes.
And because there are certain research activities and networking activities that will yield you results in 20 years or in 10 years or in 12 years, but you have to think the first goal is getting tenure, because having a great idea that will yield fruit in 15 years is not helping you get tenure unless you structure it in a very specific way. So the promotable part of your activities, it sounds very self-centered and egoistic, but if you don't keep the job, that's going to hurt everybody, including the institution, but definitely you. So you've got to be focused on your path to.
Yes, and when you're thinking about tenure, does really ask you to be of two minds when you're thinking about long-term career planning. The first being the micro, what do I do in this next 5 years in order to be able to go up and earn tenure? And then the macro, where you're thinking about what are those seeds that I want to plant early that I might want to come back to in, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. And one of the things that you want to be sure that you're doing, and I can't stress this enough, is understand your tenure process. Understand what is considered promotable activity and pay attention to your apportionment.
Yeah.
There are, I don't know how many times I've said it, but there are only 24 hours in the day, right? And you don't want to be working all the time.
No.
And so if you are working a 40-hour week or a 48-hour week or a 50-hour week, like how much of your time should be devoted to all of these spaces, and what are the promotable activities you're doing within that time? And how do you always want to be thinking through within those criteria of what's promotable, how are you going to report that out? And we'll talk about narrative next. But thinking about, so you've identified those things that are promotable.
Yeah.
Publications, research, teaching, et cetera, et cetera. The larger question now is, part of that is a numbers game, right? Like we love to say that, like, oh, it's quality, not quantity. It's both. Let's be real honest. Yeah. It's both. And so thinking through those characteristics of how much and balancing that with the quality piece is important, right? Thinking about what are the characteristics of these pieces that you need to pay attention to, and thinking that through. Is a top tier practitioner journal where you're leveraging research, how is that compared to like a top tier research only journal? If one of your key things as a researcher is connecting with practitioners, et cetera, et cetera. So thinking through what are the kinds of evidence that people are going to be looking for at your institution is really, really important.
And this, again, going back to lore, you want to root that as much as possible in the realities of what do the documents say. Now, the documents often have a certain level of vagueness to them that is potentially constructive ambiguity, to borrow a phrase, because it allows the different discipline to make decisions about what's appropriate in their area. So you want to further explore and see what has been successful, talk to people, but one of the best things to do, not in your first year most likely, but maybe in your second year, is to look through some of these files, because dean's offices usually have a stockpile of the last few years of tenure. So you can see what people have done in their files and know who actually succeeded. And that gives you very clear signals.
Yes.
As to what was successful and what wasn't successful and what's considered enough. Now, sometimes people are hyperproductive and that's not exactly the style you're going for, or they're in an area where you publish a lot in proceedings, for example, and that's a little bit easier. So they have more. So you don't attach too much to the specifics of the case. But if you see a few of those cases, you can start also seeing what has been successful or not. But again, different institutions will have vastly different criteria. For example, my colleagues in China have in their criteria very clearly a ranking of journals, and you have to have that many publications in this ranking of journal. And other places are a lot looser. So we, for example, here at Nebraska, we don't rank journals quite as strictly. We do look at, what venue did you use to publish, and that plays a role, but it's not quite as how many of them are in the top quartile or the highest rank in the field or whatever it is. And those are hard to define anyway, because our fields are a little bit squishy and they move between and all of that. So it's hard, but you have to gain an understanding of what is required and make sure you meet that, and you have a strategy, again, going back to time, because I think time is the biggest deal.
Yes, and I think one of the biggest things that you will want to do is create a 5-year plan. You want to, in that first semester of being a tenure track assistant professor, start preparing your dossier. Like we talk about, in your 5th year, you begin to pull stuff together, or your 3rd year review, you begin to pull stuff together. Start with that end in mind and work backwards. Like once you have a sense of, okay, this is what tenure is here. Now, 5 years from now, how do I get there? Because year 6 will be pulling everything together and sending it out. How do you do that work? So if you want that process to feel a little less Hunger Games-y, right? Build up that plan. Like this is what your target is every single semester for the next 10 semesters, particularly if you want, like we've talked about this, particularly if you want a break during the summer, this is exhausting, right? Make sure you have that planned out, and that there's always the creation of the plan, and then there's the living of the plan. Like planning is not the doing. And so you want to make sure that you are doing that work, right? That you are, once you make that 5-year plan, that you are checking some of that stuff off, that you're making progress every day, every week on those things.
Yeah, and every day, every week, this is where I want to pick up. We talked a lot about time planning in previous episodes. Again, we'll put them down there. But it is really, really important to think about not pushing it off. So we talked about procrastination, we talked about perfectionism, and we talked about anxiety. And you have to figure that emotional and disabling stuff early, and think about how do you work throughout, think about time management, but at the same time, because these emotions are real, and some of us are more anxious than others. For example, when I got here many years ago, and people started, and we had support groups. I think I've mentioned this story. People had support groups for tenure. I found the support group entirely filling me with anxiety and not necessarily moving me to action. There was a lot of talking, but not a lot of concrete steps. This is what you can do. And I thought to myself, the best thing that I can do with my time is actually use that time instead of sitting and meeting on a regular basis, is just get the work done. That was productive to a degree to the situation at the time. This is not something I would recommend. These groups are there to support you. But at the same time, you do have to think about these emotional responses and what is the network of support that you have around you that can help you through that process, whether it's an accountability partner that helps you work through. Is it somebody that you sit with? Again, my accountability partner for a very long time was my dear spouse, Sarah, who would sit with me once a semester, and we would I would just say, here's everything I'm doing. It's too much. Let's think together. And really, she just listened to me and ate her breakfast. But once in a while, she would say something, and I'd listen to her very often, because she can see it from the outside in the way that I'm in. And one of the mistakes I made early that I tried to correct was investing in the long term while not taking enough care of the short term. So that's a mistake I made. And I was able to debrief that. I also had internal mentors. So it's not without that. But you have to have also these external people. Therapy, especially if you're starting to feel that anxiety, having a therapist that can work with you. I was really lucky that I had a therapist that was also an academic. And so he knew the system, so he was able to also help me work through some of that emotion because he's gone through it. He was actually department chair and other things. So, but find your network around you that can support that emotional piece, because we can prepare you and people can support you throughout the active steps, but the emotions are still there. They're not gone.
Oh yeah, and one of the ways, I'm going to sound like a broken record at this point. Know your process.
Yes.
Right? Part of what creates that anxiety, part of what creates that sense of, oh my gosh, what is going on, is not knowing the process.
Yes.
And so once you know kind of what is expected of you in order to earn tenure, and once you can break that down into, I think, actionable items, and this is, I think, where that 5-year plan is really important.
Absolutely.
Because if you need 2 publications a year, that's 10 publications. That's a very different checkbox. 10 publications, check, versus I need to work on 600 words for my literature review this week. Like that's a really different timescale. That's also a different actionable item. And I think when I know for myself, when I'm perseverating and I'm feeling some anxiety because of a problem I'm facing, breaking it down into what can I actually do that will help me relieve this anxiety that I'm feeling is super helpful. But part of it is really thinking through that actionable item. So also, if as you're doing this, if something happens, we alluded to this earlier, if something happens, you have a medical emergency, you have a family emergency, you have something going on, ask for an extension. This is not the time to be like, oh, they're going to see this as weakness. No, they're going to see you as human.
Yeah.
They're going to see you as human.
And in most systems, it is actually rooted in the process, the rules for the process. We've had faculty members who had a child during that period and said, this is too much. Illness, pandemic, we did that for almost anybody that asked. And there are serious circumstances in our lives. And the idea is, especially if it's about something that's connected to health in any way, shape, or form, having extra stress on you is not going to help you heal faster. So the idea is we want to take that off of you, give you that space, and then make sure that you can emerge successful.
This is not the time to be like, I can do it all. Stop. Why? Why would you even add that additional pressure onto yourself when there are pressure release levers, right? That you can leverage. So that's not the time to be super person.
Yes.
Don't do it. I beg of you. If you had to do your tenure process all over, if you had to start as a new assistant professor, breathe. What would you do differently, just out of curiosity?
I think I have, but it's a little bit unfair. I think being considerably more strategic about, especially about writing. I mean, this was my biggest challenge, was getting the stuff written. Collecting data, doing the research, I loved, I did. I had more data than I could actually get to at that early stage. But the writing, I mean, that's where paralysis and all of that came in. And having a strategy and having a clear vision of what the outlets are, how do you get there, how much do you need to write, and then that time management for writing. Well, there was a lot of procrastination over my first few years. I was obviously successful enough, but knowing what I know now, but it's hard to know for me to know what I know now as an assistant. I mean, this is why we're talking to you. We want to give you some of that so you have some tools to do it better and not to be in that position where nobody is telling you how this can be successful. We want you to be successful. Your institution does too. It just doesn't always put all the resources where they need to go to support you in that way, to give you the tools. And sometimes they simply don't know what works in your discipline. Because you might be, like many people in our program, are 1 or 2 people in a program. And if you have 2 fairly young academics, you just don't have that depth of knowledge of, I've been doing this for 25 years, and here are some things you can do quickly to get some publications out. And here's a way to collect data that can reach market really, really effectively while you're working on bigger and deeper and more quality pieces. Because there is that exchange. You can do some things really fast, and some things take longer time, and you should be doing both at the same time.
Yes.
And that's where...
Thinking about publication pipeline.
Yes.
Card somewhere.
So all of our shows really pour into this thing.
They're coming together. They're coming together. We've got some cohesion.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
wish I would have pulled on my dissertation more. I wish I would have.
Yeah.
I as a beginning assistant professor, allowed myself to get pulled into a lot of other projects right away.
Yeah.
And did not take I took a couple of easy wins, quote unquote, with my dissertation, but I wish I would have done more of that. I wish I would have, obviously was successful enough, and that enough is a big thing.
Yes.
Right? Like enough. I've done enough to earn tenure. But I wish that I would have been more strategic in that way. Sorry, Karen Woolwind. You mentored me so well, and I failed you.
Did you though?
I mean, I did enough, but I was not as strategic as she would have liked me to be, and so that is not a reflection on her mentorship ability. It's a reflection on my general levels of excitement. So learn from that. Also, in terms of things to help you with thinking about that 5-year plan and what it could look like, we've got a new blog at notthatkindofdoctor.net.
Yes.
Did I get that right? Because it's new to me. Great.
Written out, so not that kind of
notthatkindofdoctor.net. Link in the description, where I've pulled together kind of a mini workbook for you on crafting your 5-year plan.
Ooh, I need to do that.
When you're moving into tenure. You're not moving into tenure.
No,
we're trying to get retired, guy.
Not anytime soon, but good.
I mean, look, my financial advisor keeps telling me it's not anytime soon, and I keep going, but how soon? I love my job.
We will not do an episode on retirement planning, I promise. I promise. No retirement planning.
This was not. There was no production meeting around that, so there might be. I'm just saying because some of the things that I've learned, I feel would be good. So go to the blog. It's their mini workbook to get at some of the more in-depth stuff that we've been talking about here and give you some action items as you're sitting down and doing that work. So I think the last thing that we probably want to talk about today is how you talk about your career, how you talk about your activity, your promotable activity, and package them into a narrative.
Yeah, and for me, I mean, we talked about my personal history, and I've talked about this before. This was one of my biggest struggles, is to create a narrative that says, this is who I am, and this is how it all fits together. So the intentionality needs to be even earlier in that 5-year plan. How do all of these elements come together? Because if it looks like you're here and here and here, it gets harder to tell that story. That being said, obviously, again, going back, I did just enough to make it through, but there were some comments about the fact that my work seems to be somewhat decentralized, and it was harder for people to see how all of these strands connect. So if you are a little bit wider, which is perfectly fine, you still need to find that narrative.
Yeah, well, and you don't necessarily need to find that narrative. How are you living that? How are you living those connections, right? Like that was a similar piece of feedback that I received early in my process was, oh, it looks like you're doing this and you're doing this and you're doing this. And how are they connecting? And so then by the time I presented things for tenure, I was really trying to think through and about why am I doing these projects? How do they like link up? It's not because, ooh, shiny.
Yeah.
Oh, glitter. It was they contribute to this larger notion of what I want my work to be about. And part of crafting that narrative was getting whoever was reading my documents to care about the work that I was trying to do in the world through these various projects as much as I did, and building up those connections. It wasn't just because I was flitting from activity to activity to activity. It was because I was really invested in a larger goal, and let me pull that all together for you, right? You want there to be some level of cohesion to the work that you do, and sometimes that's not comprehensible from the outside, right? It can look like,
very much so,
oh, you're doing everything and you're here and you're there. And no, let me tell you why this is happening. And that's where that narrative becomes really, really helpful. And it's not just, I use the word narrative specifically here because you're not just reporting out, right? You're really building the story of why you do the work that you're doing and how that's been functioning, right? And remembering that as part of that narrative, you're also responsible for external reviewers. Oftentimes in the tenure process, your department or your chair is going to choose a couple, but you can also submit some names. And it's often easier if you know whose names you're submitting.
Yes.
So this is where one of Guy's favorite things comes in that he's really, really good at, the networking.
Yes, but just to be clear, this is something I've learned to do over time. I wasn't very good at it very early on. I did not feel very confident. The cultural differences always make it really, really hard to enter spaces. This is where your mentors and people that you're working with can expand your networking. So people think about networking often in like these business kind of ideas around networking, where you walk into a room where you don't know anybody and you start conversations. And I don't really believe, that can work sometimes. And that's what conferences can serve you. But really, it starts with personal relationship with specific people. And for that, just going to conferences and then finding the people that are leading in your field or are emerging in your field and find opportunities to have conversations, whether it's right after they present, first of all, hear them, get to their demeanor, then talk to them after. You get a sense of the people after that. And because some people are leading in your field and you don't want them to look at your file because they're that kind of people who are just going to be not so positive. So you want to know how they are.
And keep in mind that normally it's at similar institutions, right?
Yes.
Like when you're sending out these external reviewers, it's at similar institutions. So if you're at, a tier 2 research institution, you want to make sure that whoever you send that external letter to or that request for an external letter is going to understand what that means.
Yeah.
And be willing to let go of what the criteria are at their institution, because that translation can sometimes be problematic and result in some awkward lettering, which is less about the person the letter is being written about and more about that reviewer's inability to
understand the task.
Yes, like know your audience.
Yes.
Well, this wouldn't work at my institution, not at your institution.
That was never the question. Yeah.
Like, Focus. Focus.
Yes.
That was not the ask.
And as department chair, that was always part of my conversation with people who were going up for tenure. It's like choose people and choose wisely, and choose people that are at similar institutions, so they will make that judgment, because there are some institutions where people will always try to judge it or will write something dismissive like, in our institution it wouldn't be okay, but in yours I guess it's fine. That's not a sentence you want.
I mean, yeah, there is some this is where like the people who love the fact that tenure feels like the Hunger Games, avoid those people.
Yes, exactly.
Avoid
Just
them.
don't.
Not your friends.
So, and that goes back to networking. You learn that only through interacting with people. This is not something you will learn from reading their papers. Their papers will give you zero clues about how they will be in public. So, again, the most obvious places are conferences, but there are service opportunities, especially in larger states where there are multiple R1 or R2 institutions. And so you get to interact with them in informal ways or formal ways, but around other topics. You get a sense of who they are, and that can be helpful. There is that thing that in most tenure processes, and this is the flip side of the networking, if you actually work together, you usually will not ask for those letters. So there's a restriction. If you work together on a piece of writing or on research or something like that, then they cannot be the people who write your external letters.
Yes, I have professional colleague friends who they introduce themselves to me as like, I'm your tenure friend. We are never going to work on a project together because you're going to put me on your list for an external letter.
Yeah.
And
that's lovely.
I appreciated that.
Yes.
I appreciated that a lot. Like just the fact that very clear, like you are going to be delightfully supportive. And this is how this is functioning. I really, really enjoyed that. You want to be, as you're thinking about all these things, like pulling these strands of your research, your teaching, and your service together to be really clear in that narrative construction.
Yeah.
But you also want to be aware of your time, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, we keep coming back to time and this idea that you need to do enough. You don't necessarily need to do everything, right? So how, as you're thinking about that everything, what would you do in order to like make sure you're able to balance that? Because you also want to have a life, right? Like this should not be 5 years of horrible existence.
Indentured servitude.
Yes.
Yes. So it is about time, and it is about, and we've talked about this before, it is about saying no to some things. So if you think about that narrative and that 5-year plan, and people come to you excited about it with a specific project, thinking about it, don't say yes or no immediately. Say, I need to think about it, go think about it, think about your goals and your plans. How does it fit in there? And if it doesn't, it probably needs to be no. Rarely, once in a while, there's an opportunity of a lifetime and you're going to say yes, and that'll be great. But more often than not, if it doesn't fit within your plan, it's probably extra work that's going to take time from you reaching your goals. And again, goes back to time. If you want to have a life, or just to feel successful and not constantly out of breath, you have to think about that aspect of things and constantly, because when you come to an institution, everybody's excited about you. This is why they chose you. So they're going to try to rope you in to as many things as possible, thinking they're helping you. And they might be if it's within your plan.
If it's in your purview, right?
But it might not.
It might not be. But sometimes it's really good intentions.
Yeah.
Right?
Most of the time.
I be aware the hallway asks. Beware those like really quick service asks that often happen in a hallway, where it's, oh, could you do this? Send me an email. Let me think that through.
Create a buffer.
Yes, I'll create a buffer so that it's not kind of this immediate response, and then you're locked into this thing that's been asked of you without clear understanding of like, what does it mean? What is going on there? When you're thinking about that, being really thoughtful about your time and how you're organizing your time, it helps you think through how the activities that you're engaged in add up to that narrative, right? While also making space for, I don't know, a life, hobbies.
Yeah. And I have an example, for example. Just
An example,
recently,
for example?
An example, for example, for par example? I don't know. Anyway, when you get requests for journal reviews or even conference reviews, one of the things you have to think about, you can do only a certain number a year. Sit with your mentor and think about how many you can do a year, because it takes time, and time you've got limited of. So yes, it's fantastic and you're providing service, but you want to limit that and make that reasonable. You will get better over time and you can do more, but at the beginning, it's okay to do none or to do very few. The only ones you want to do are ones that are exactly in the middle of your research or where your research is going, because that's going to actually support you. Because we ran out of time to read. Here's a task where you must read. Somebody did a decent review asking for your feedback.
We hope.
We
right?
hope.
We
Or
hope.
sometimes it's not very good. But A, it'll be easier because it's in the middle. And the second thing is you will learn something in the process and it'll support you. And if it's great, if it's bad writing, you'll see what not to do. And if it's good writing, you'll learn something about writing. So it's all fantastic. If they ask you to do, I just got a review for something around mental health for students. And I'm going, well, I know something about it, but am I the best person to review that? And do I have time for one more manuscript? And the answer was, I would love to help you, but no.
No.
And so that's something to think about, because in the beginning, sometimes you're just excited that somebody's asking for your opinion.
Right. And if
It feels really good, but
the kind of the boundaries I've put around that is, if I can't get that review done in the next 2 weeks,
yes,
I
then
say
you shouldn't
no.
do it. Yeah.
which, has worked handily sometimes, most of the time.
Yeah.
About 80% of the time. It
All
works.
right.
So we've talked through
lot.
tenure.
A lot.
Oh gosh.
This is a long show.
I feel a little anxious myself.
No, I feel good that it's behind me. So this is really good. It's totally behind me. I'm good.
So in this episode, we've tried to kind of lay bare some of the processes that you might encounter if you are one of the lucky folks to have landed a tenure track job at your institution, thinking about how to understand those processes, as well as some ways to construct that narrative.
Yeah.
I feel like we did an okay job.
Yeah. And there's more to come.
There's more to come. Like the flip side of what happens when you're like, tenure track, not for
Maybe
me.
not. Yeah.
Or something else, not for me. So coming soon. It's exciting. So thanks for tuning in. Subscribe if you haven't. And we'll see you in the next one.